Live from the Talking Joe Studios.
Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey there, welcome to Talking Joe and a very special episode where we will be talking to the legend that is Richard Starkings and specifically about his work on the Action Force comic, sort of to tie in with the timing of the Total Action Force Kickstarter. And joining me will also be the man, Paddy Lennon. Here he is.
Hi, Mark, everybody.
Hi, Paddy. Good to have you on with us. So, obviously, you've got a big vested interest in all things Action Force at the moment, sort of really immersing yourself in it with the book that you're writing. So I think who better to talk to about it all and find out more than the man who really was behind the comic when it came out. Was it 1987, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What did I just say? Yes, 1987.
1987 is right, yeah.
Yes. So joining us today will be Richard Starkings, the British font designer, comic book letterer, editor, writer, and I'm sure many more things too. He was an editor at MarvelUK in the late 1980s. Titles he edited included Death's Head, Dragon's Claws, but most importantly, and putting all the others, all the way to the bottom of our interest pile is the weekly Action Force comic from 1987. And for more context, in the beginning of the 1990s, he devoted himself to the craft of lettering and especially being the early pioneer of computer-based lettering, founding Comicraft in 1992 and going on to create his own comics, specifically the world of Elephantmen. So he is currently the ongoing creative force and writer behind that book. So here he is. Welcome, Richard.
Hi there. I'm glad I'm live because that picture of me that you snagged from Wikipedia. You've got to remember, I was at a 4-day show in New York. Wikipedia turns up and says, "Can we take an official picture of you?" And I didn't realize that I was basically drained of all energy. I've got a thin film of sweat across my forehead, and I look like I'm just going to fall asleep in about 2 minutes. So at least it's
typical con appearance for any creator, I think.
Oh gosh, never let anybody take a picture of you at Comic-Con unless it's the first hour of day one.
And then and insist,
and even then,
and even then, yeah, I want. Where's your makeup, girls? Where's somebody groom my beard?
I'm amazed that this is a thing that someone's come up and said, "Hi, I'm from Wikipedia. Can I take a photo of you?"
They prefer to have Wikipedia photographs on the site so that nobody can say you don't have permission. And I think I had to sign something. And I wish I'd said, "Let me sign it after I see the photograph." But too late. I will have to appeal.
But there you go. So shall we take our travel time machine back to the heady days of 1987 when the Action Force comic was launching? I've got some illustrative content here. This is my bound Action Force weekly.
Send me one. I don't have any issues.
And I've got. I'll do a solo view here.
Have I signed that?
There we go. We got. Look at that distinctive Starkings lettering. I think you've got a future in that, along with some of the other Action Force collaborators' signatures as well.
Well, actually, on the wall behind you, you've got the print by Ladrone of Elephantmen, and he saw me signing some comics once, and I was using my bank signature, my autograph, right? And he said to me, he's from Mexico originally. He said, Richard, the people want to know who you are. You must make your signature legible. And here I am, a comic book letterer, and I saw the sense in that. And if you look at the print that you have, Mark, you can make out both our names.
Yeah. Here we go.
And that's
Starkings
and Ladrone.
Ladrone with the very stylized O.
Yeah, and he does not sign his checks like that. I can tell you that. So he taught me something which a lot of writers could take a leaf out of his book, because you can't always read people's signatures. Kev Hopgood, you can read. Most writers, though, they just do that.
Yeah.
It's like the iPad signature that we do now at the coffee shop. You just go,
There's a few out there that I might name and shame. There's Garth Ennis.
Yes.
It's a short name as well.
Yeah, come on, just sign Garth and be done with it.
Yeah,
everybody knows who you are.
I think Dougie Braithwaite needs to practice his signature. Unfortunately,
I didn't say that.
That's one of the things where you look at a book and say, okay, there's a signature in there. Who of these creators have I actually? Who have I met?
Be careful what you say.
Oh dear. So, but actually, while we're on the topic of Ladrone, I'll just share this piece as well. So this is my Ladrone, and I've got it as a. Here we go.
Oh, is it a commission?
It's an overlay. This is a commission.
Wow.
So painted, I guess mostly sort of probably gouache. I think it might have been. So that's the very famous G.I. Joe cover, originally by Mike Zeck.
Wow, that's great.
I have you to thank for the inspiration of reaching out to Ladrone, because he's an amazing talent, and sort of beyond knowing him for his work on Marvel's Cable, until I saw the work on Elephantmen, I had no idea what he was really capable of in terms of just work that would completely blow my mind.
And he's still working on the Hip Flask miniseries, so hopefully that'll be finished soon.
Excellent. Yes, I very much look forward to that happening and rounding out that Hip Flask work. So after a little bit of a detour, 1987. So
very good year for music.
So what was it like at MarvelUK in 1987, and what were you doing, and how did you sort of come into the Action Force project?
So that's like three questions. Number one, Marvel was a lot of fun in that era, and I often refer to it as Marvel College, because I learned so much. In a week, when you're thrown in at the deep end, there was no computers. We were doing everything manually. We were using computers, but that was the typographer's area of expertise, and we would mark up copy. I learned how to mark up copy, how to cast off, how to do all those things that we had to do back in the day, which I'd lied about in my interview and said that I could do. So I had to learn the reprographics machine. I had to learn paste up. We had one of those waxers that was basically hot wax that you fed your bromide through so that it was sticky on the back, and we did physical paste up. But I think I was still working on Secret Wars at the time, and I can't always remember the timeline, because we were our office, which was basically me, Simon Furman, Ian Rimmer was our boss, John Tomlinson was a designer working on Captain Britain and other titles, and who else was in our office? That was sort of the core when I started at Marvel. And Ian had come from Fleetway, where he had been editing Scream, and he brought Simon with him. Simon was an assistant editor on Scream, so they had very real editorial experience, and I'm so glad I ended up with them, because they taught me a lot. John Tomlinson had been there a couple of 3 years before me, and he was a design graduate. I was an English graduate. I'd gone to a college doing English and media studies, but I wanted to do both. That's the sort of theme in my career. I wanted to do design, but I also wanted to write the copy. So I was sort of, often given free rein. When I used to letter strips on Zoids, which was featured in Spider-Man at the time, Ian was the writer and editor of that. And when we did stuff for annuals, other writers stepped in, and I would play with the words. And I would say to Ian, when I brought the pages in the morning, I edited it a little bit, and Ian would say, you rewrote it, didn't you? But we were working with very young writers and artists, and Ian was sort of familiar with the idea of the sub-editor. So Ian was an editor, but at IPC, a sub-editor, which was what Simon was, it was his job to knock things into shape. So I sort of became a sub-editor on Zoids because Ian was the writer, and I would be given some freedom to rephrase things, especially if they didn't fit, because I was lettering on the boards. And right. Simon was very generous in that regard too, because I lettered hundreds of pages of Transformers written by Simon. So I had gained some editorial experience thanks to Ian. And then one day I was invited into the managing director's office with Jenny O'Connor, who is the editor-in-chief. And they said, how do you feel about editing a book by yourself? And I said, I'd love to do that, thinking it was months in the future. And
in the 5-year plan. Yeah.
Now, we were sort of comic snobs in our office, Simon, John, Ian, and I. And Ian didn't come necessarily as a comics fan, but Simon, John, and I were. We were fans of Marvel. That's why we were at Marvel. So a lot of the editorial staff, the editor-in-chief was Jenny O'Connor, and there was sort of like, oh, you're the boys. You're the boys that are nerds. That term wasn't thrown around in those days. So Jenny wanted me to work directly for her, and I was offered Action Force. And I didn't realize that the next day I would move into Jenny's office. And it felt like it was the next day. I'm sure there was a little bit of time, but very shortly after that meeting, Ian came in and said, okay, team, while we are still a team, we're having a meeting. And that was when it was announced. And I didn't realize how everything was being rearranged editorially. Ian handed me a folder after that meeting, which had all the Action Force material in it. And then that day, I started thinking about who I was going to work with to write and draw it. And, pedal to the metal, I was editing Action Force. I wasn't doing work with the old team. I was in Jenny's office, and I think I can't remember when Steve White came into the equation, but he was my assistant editor. And that was a great pairing because I love Steve. Steve was into everything military. He's into dinosaurs much more than he's into G.I. Joe. But he knew guns. He knew tanks. He was one of those kids at school that just loved everything of that nature, So then I had to figure out who was going to write it, who was going to do covers, who was going to do the art. And I got along really well with Simon and still do. So he was my first go-to. But I also wanted to have different writers work on the series because you have to get ahead. And we were already behind. But I had actually... Go ahead.
I was going to say there was an enormous roll call of writers and artists on.
You
on the
think
book.
so? You have that impression.
Well, yes.
But good writers, very, very hard to find. Writers that understood the editorial process, even harder to find. And this was the Alan Moore era. This was post-Warrior. Swamp Thing probably was coming out at that time. Frank Miller was writing Daredevil. We were all gobbling that stuff up. But your writer inspired by Alan Moore is not necessarily your Action Force writer. Simon understood editorial. So he understood, here's a toy, make sure it's in the story somewhere. He's been doing that for years. And, I'm sure you've met or interviewed Simon. He's a very affable, easygoing personality. He's not got a massive ego. He does the work. He delivers it on time. He would often come in at 9 o'clock in the morning with his sausage sandwich, and he'd been writing all night. We all ate the sausage sandwiches at Marvel. There was a lovely sandwich shop, kitty corner, to our office in Redan Place, and it was a stop on the way in. You make yourself a cup of tea because it was freezing, and you had your sausage sandwich. Other sandwiches were available, but Simon was easy. We used to play squash I think there was a YMCA across the street, and he and I used to play squash. And many editorial decisions would be made before or after squash. So Simon was up for it. We had an 11-page story in the first issue. And, Kev wasn't simply an available artist. Kev and I met in Leeds, and we were working on a strip called Forest for Martin Locke for Harrier Publications. And when I moved down to London, when I got to Marvel, I don't know if Kev called me. I don't know what the situation was. I'm sure Kev used to come down for the Westminster Comic Mart, as I did. I was living in London. I was already working in London before I got the job at Marvel. But when I got the job at Marvel, there was a room for let in the house I was living in Wembley. And I called Kev and said, if you want to move down to London, there's a room right here. And so he moved down. He actually only stayed there 1 month, but because he was in a shoe closet, basically. And I had the biggest room in the house. And so he moved his drawing table into my room, and we would sit up until 1 o'clock at night. He would be drawing. I would be lettering. I was working on Transformers. He submitted a sample page through me to the editor of Transformers, which was either Sheila or Ian at that time. And I loved his work. So I had recommended him for Zoids. He came into the office. I don't think he even did a sample page on Zoids. I think Ian had been keeping it in mind. We ran one episode of Forest as a backup in Mighty World of Marvel in like 85 or 86. So it was sort of just a matter of time to get him onto Zoids. But then when I inherited Action Force, I think I may have stolen him from Zoids. I can't remember. Because I worked on Zoids a long time. I lettered pretty much every story. And as you can see here, I also lettered Action Force initially, but never worked for yourself.
Right.
So,
right.
So Kev, in my memory, Coils of the Serpent, is that issue 6 or 7?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. He did an 11-pager for the first issue. We were given a little bit more of a budget, and he was perfect. I mean, look at that artwork.
Yeah, I mean that sort of. I deliberately picked the page on the right because it's one of probably my favorite page out of everything in the weekly. It's incredible work, and Kev's work, in particularly in the first few stories, is just sort of out of the gate is incredible. And I get the sneaking feeling that he might have had a little bit more time for some of the earlier strips than possibly the later scripts, just because it seemed like.
I don't think so. I think
Right.
there's a story there too, which Kev would cop to. But he was definitely, he's in his first 2 or 3 years. He really wanted to work in comics. He was a fan. And as you can see, he understands anatomy. He understands architecture. Who inked this? Is it Dave Hine?
Ooh, I don't know off the top of my head.
I can't remember when was it Dave Hine?
I'll see if I can find it while you're.
He may have actually been inking his own pencils at this point, because it was.
Yeah, I have a feeling. Dave Harwood. Dave
Harwood, who also came from Harrier Comics. He drew, penciled, and inked HMS Conqueror, I think was a strip that he was working on, and another creator that would come to the Westminster Arms, where lots of business deals were made, when lots of conversations about the availability. We needed inkers. I wanted to recreate the American system of pencils, inks, letters, colors, because it was fast. We'd been working at that point with a lot of artists who inked their own pencils, and around this time, Tom DeFalco had visited and, pushed for that sort of system, understood it. We wanted to impress Tom. Jim Shooter had been over. Artists weren't fast enough. Simon had many experiences of artists delivering work late. I remember one time him dissolving into a pool of sweat because one of the artists on Transformers had been detained, I think, at the airport in Paris. He was an American artist. He'll know who he is. Simon will know who he is. And that stress on a weekly comic, you had to deliver. Yeah. There was no not delivering. This is where I got my work ethic from. When you have to produce comics every week, of course we use reprints because the pressure was off the scale. So you wanted to be weeks ahead. We used to mail pencil pages to the letterer. They would mail them back to us. We would then mail them to the inker, because you always want copies because we had photocopiers. And Kev was local. We used a lot of local London artists because they could come in, drop off pages, pick up script, and go out again, and stay around for a drink in the pub. So, Westminster Comic Mart and the Redan pub were key in comics in those days when we were in Bayswater. So, so Kev was an easy pick for me, and that's the thing when you're young and you haven't had much experience, you want to work with people of your own age, your own, that you're reading the same comics, you're exposed to the same comics. It was about being part of that group of writers and artists. It wasn't really, there weren't that many people available. There was also a brain drain from MarvelUK to 2000 AD because we were regarded as a stepping stone, and 2000 AD paid better by and large, So, and always, it's a buyer's market. So younger artists will work for lower page rates. And it was very difficult to raise those page rates because management would often say, find a cheaper artist. And that still happens today. That's why you have a lot of artists at Marvel and DC who work from overseas where the value of the dollar is greater. The same was true, in England, that, people wanted to get a break. Kev was one of them. He went to work on Night Zero, Beyond Zero, for 2000 AD, after a short, maybe 2-3 years with us, then on to 2000 AD, Barry Kitson, a lot of artists. So there was a definite pool of talent, but most of them wanted to work for 2000 AD, still true today. So we had to constantly develop new talent. And I'm trying to think who else drew in those first 20 issues. But
yeah, I'll add my list back into the.
well, actually, I'm
thing we
glad
can
you
talk about.
go back to those two covers, the first two covers.
And you were talking about how long you had as well, sort of before,
I can't remember.
once being given that folder.
I hit the ground running, and we all love Jeff Senior, and Jeff was, my first pick for cover artist, and thank goodness he said yes, because his stuff is so full of energy, and that cover, of course, I wanted to look like a blister pack. I wanted it to look
right, of course,
like your
background.
Like a figure.
Here.
Yeah.
And you can't do that for every issue, and that's when we were still working with the Action Force transparency, which is supplied by Hasbro, and we hated working with transparencies because you had to work so hard to distinguish one issue from another when you've only got the top third of the cover visible at Smith's, right? So changing the color was a way of working with covers. And to answer, one of your questions that you sent me ahead of time, yes, I did design most of the covers. We really had to hit the audience hard, and this was a learning experience for me, how to make covers interesting. One of the things I learned, as is visible here, groups of 3 work better than groups of 4 or more, because the other characters frame the central character. Trench is the central character on that first issue. These were the characters we were given by Hasbro. We could not choose from the entire range. We had to go with the ones that were being launched in England. And when I looked at all the reprint material, that reprint material didn't focus on our characters till later in the day. So I wanted the 5 lead characters that we were asked to work with on the first 2 covers, and that meant that what was in their stories was dictated by the cover choices that I probably already made. I probably said to Simon, okay, these are the 3 characters in the first story. Now, I will say, and Simon knows that this pissed me off, I would have liked that first story, which is 11 pages, I would have liked them to be in costume. But Simon had them undercover.
Yeah.
That first story is called Gunboat, and they're undercover.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Simon, what are you doing to me? And looking back, I would have said, rewrite it. But I guarantee you, I didn't have the time or the wisdom or the experience. I should have said to him out of the gate, every single page, they should be in costume. Luckily, we had that cover, which I think I owned that until the 90s. I think I sold that in the 90s. I think I had those 2 first covers. I think I probably gave a tenner to Jeff, tenner each, not 2 for a tenner. But those days, artists would make ridiculous deals, and we didn't know the value of them.
Yeah.
My heart actually broke there, Richard.
Old long ago, and they were beautiful pieces because he painted them. No computer wizardry back in those days. So I was learning about how to make covers, how to make them interesting, how to make them engaging, and how to differentiate a single issue from another issue and create that sense of excitement. And choosing Jeff for covers was sort of a no-brainer because they're bouncing off the cover there, and there's a lot of tension in Snake Eyes and the Cobra agent there, so that's the story behind those 2 covers. We eventually got to use the outline version of the logo so we could change some elements. I don't know, it was very fixed. Not my favorite logo to work with.
And so while we took, I was I'll let you finish, but I was going to say while you're talking about sort of designing the covers, that sort of a lot of people, when they actually meet you and they ask you to sign something, that actually I'll go full
I
screen
sign on the white, right?
on me. You might do something like this, and it's like a writer doing a drawing. Wow.
Yeah, and I've been getting better, but every writer is a frustrated artist because artists are so frustrating. You just wish you could draw it the way you see it in your head, and you wish they were John Byrne, you wish they were Frank Bellamy, you wish they were Mike Zeck. But having said that, the artists I got to work with on Action Force were great. Mike Collins was both a writer and an artist, and he wrote like issue 5, 4 and 5, 5 and 6, something like that. And they all brought in different, ways of telling a story, which again, you want to work with people, you create a sense of competition. That's the advantage of working with different teams. You do have more control as an editor when you work with, there's Mike. Now that's a story behind that cover too. So we knew very early on that all you had to do was put Snake Eyes on a cover, and that issue would outsell any others. So I said to Mike, I just want this. This was a reprint of an annual, I think, or a single issue.
It was a reprint of a full single issue. Yeah, I think it might be issue 31 or something.
Yeah, and I said, just do a full figure of Snake Eyes, and this will sell itself. You learn very quickly working in comics for the sort of 8 to 12 age group that they will slavishly copy any figure that has all its limbs, hands, head, and toes. That cover alone, probably 20 kids sent in copies of that drawing. It's what children look for, and it's what we look for as adults. It's very dissatisfying when you only get close-ups, and that Destro splash page, he's full figure on that splash page, if I remember correctly.
I think so. Yeah.
But that's sort of storytelling 101. Always show a character full figure. Jim Shooter used to say, "How do we know he's not wearing roller skates?" But more importantly, how do we know that the children will copy this picture if you don't show the full figure? And if you sort of throw your mind back to the drawings you copied slavishly out of comics yourselves, probably it was a full figure drawing.
I am guilty of tracing this cover as a child.
Tracing them, copying them, it doesn't matter. That's what Pep used to do. If you look at people, if you look at Dave Gibbons' artwork when he was a kid, it's Batman. It's all the characters that they loved. They did the same thing. We do the same thing. It's a very natural reaction to something that you love, to draw it, to copy it, to trace it. Yes, I traced so many superheroes from the Foom calendar or something like that. I remember a Foom drawing of Hulk and Iron Man that I slavishly copied. So that's part, that's kind of part of the editorial approach when you're aiming at younger readers. Can you do a done in one story? Can you make it about key characters? And because we only had 5 pages a week, often we would focus in on 1 or 2 characters. And there's the solid non-transparency logo there. The black really helps you read Action Force. And maybe we changed the color of the star. I don't know. But that Destro down and out, if I remember correctly, that's Mike's pencils with Brian Hitch's inks.
Yeah.
And Brian was a very young artist that I, discovered. Steve Parkhouse sent him to me. Steve Parkhouse is a writer and artist who's been around the block. And there's a story behind that one too. Isn't this the prologue to Silent Running?
The silent interlude.
Silent interlude. I always call it Silent Running. So we realized we couldn't run a silent issue. You can't do that in a British weekly that's aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. So, but we had to run it. You know, the backstory to that is when I became the editor, I took home 70 issues of G.I. Joe over the weekend and read them all in 2 days, thinking this is going to be crap. And then realizing that they were terrific because Larry Hama was the driving force. And the moment I read Silent Interlude, I was like, we have to use this because it's got Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow in it. They're two most popular characters. There's a reason why they feature so large in the movies, right? Because they're intriguing, because Snake Eyes doesn't talk. Are they brothers? What's going on? They seem very similar. They don't talk. So I remember we debated that. I don't know where or when, but I came up with the idea of a prologue and an epilogue. And I gave that issue to John Tomlinson, who was writing under the name Steve Allen. Because at the time, you know, we felt that if you were named Steve or Allen, you'd be successful in comics. So he put the two together. I then became Richard Allen because Allen is my middle name. And Mike Collins became Ford Allen. There was a whole in-house joke. But those guys do not exist. But again, you wanted to work with people in editorial. I wanted to work with John because he understood. You know, he understood the brief. And the brief was, I want a sequence with some words before and after. And I think they were called Truth and Consequences. And Brian was sort of on the up and coming. He had actually drawn Dan Abnett's first script. It was just a character piece about one character, and it was Dan's first commission and it was Brian's first art, but we didn't use that till later. That's my memory.
Okay.
And again, it gave me the excuse to put Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes on a cover, although that might not be the cover for Silent Interlude. I can't remember. We put Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow on a lot of covers, you know, because, you know, we only lasted 50 issues. That's only a year.
Yeah.
You know, and we were hoping, scroll back. That'll give me a little bit of a prompt. Yeah, that poster image on issue 3, that was a great image. There were some great covers there. Look at that. So there you go. The three characters, then the one character close up often works well. Then we used a reprint on Dogfight. Yep. Then you've got 2 characters on a cover. And again, you know, I was very conscious of making the colors different on every cover so that they looked distinct, because my thing about my memory of comics is I can remember what was on the cover. If you can do a memorable cover, then you sort of emotionally connect the reader to the issue. Yeah. You know, you talk about a story and you ask your friend, what was on the cover? Oh yeah, I remember that one. You know, Daredevil pointing his gun at you on No More Mr. Nice Guy. And that was definitely an influence on issue 3, where he's pointing his finger at you because we cannot point a gun at an 8 to 12-year-old. Right. So the gun is there, right?
Although later on you did with one of the Crimson Guard covers.
Yep.
This one.
But they are shooting.
Oh no, this one.
Yeah,
28.
This one there, 28. Yeah.
And I wrote that story with Mike Collins. I went to stay with Mike in Cardiff one weekend, and we had just seen Platoon. You know, and we were all up inside our social consciousnesses. And I was in the pub with Kev Hopgood, and we were talking, and Dave Hine, I think, was there. And I remember us talking about Platoon because we'd been to see it, and we were like sort of horrified that we were doing this comic that glorified war. And, you know, Hasbro was not happy with me that I did this kind of story where a Crimson Guard is sort of full of regret. in rural England as Crimson Guardsman's cover is blown, you know, and Hasbro basically said to me, why didn't Action Force jump through the window and kill him? and it's, well, because haven't you seen Platoon? You know, so in reaction to that, I wrote a 2-part story called Violent Lives, where Lady J gets shot. There it is. You have to do the George Perez Superman cover at some point.
Of course, yeah. Wow.
Unfortunately, and I know Steve White separated that. It's very difficult to do fire when there's no flames there. So that's a separated cover where Steve White has done these little dots to indicate flame. But I just thought, right, I'm going to write the most violent 2-part story. Again, you know, this is in the era of Frank Miller when, you know, there was a lot of violence in Daredevil. Matt Murdock would have bruises on his face after a fight with Bullseye, and Bullseye kills Elektra. So this was the Frank Miller issue, which actually I've recently pastiched in Elephantmen. There's actually a whole sequence that is based on the sequence when Trench kicks in the door at what was his headquarters called? Where did Destro operate out of?
Yes, Flint kicks in the door to Mars.
To Mars.
Yeah.
Is it Flint? Oh yeah,
it's Flint with the Trent was the kind of the more bureaucratic
the
boss. Yeah.
I'm calling him Trench actually because my Zebra character was called Trench. Flint had a trench gun. That's where my old man brain is kicking in. So I did this whole sequence where he nearly kills Destro, and Destro says, if I was in your position, I'd have pulled the trigger. And that's one of my favorite things that I wrote because I was just so angry with Hasbro. I was like, okay, if you want violence, I'm going to call this. The story was originally called Violence. And then I changed it to Violent Lives to tie in with the narrative. But that's what they wanted. They loved it. So I was like, so that's one of the few ones. I don't know if I wrote more than 3 stories.
I was flicking through this morning. It wasn't necessarily a huge. Once I'd figured out that you were Richard Allen and a bit of Ford Allen, there was. I think the biggest storyline was I think that one that we were just talking about, and what I flicked through the Action Force Monthly as well, the European missions one, and it looked like Richard Allen was.
Steve. I wrote one with Steve, I think, and oftentimes, you know, if the editor's writing, it's because the either writers aren't available or the editor knows what needs to be written for that issue, and quickly. I used to go in at 7 a.m. to do any writing I would do. I wrote some Zoids, I wrote some Ghostbusters, I wrote some Action Force, and I would just get it done as part of my working day, you know, when no one was around, because it was quicker that way, you know. And yes, I got some extra pocket money, but sometimes working with a writer that just doesn't understand the editorial imperative of splash pages, action, and toys, you know. So which one did I write? I can't remember.
It looked like it was issue 1, 4, 12, and 13.
Oh wow!
So it was the Dougie Braithwaite double bluff story. It was called Plot.
I have no recollection.
Actually, am I getting that mix? That's Ford Allen, so that might have been Mike Collins, possibly.
So, you know, the thing about Action Force Monthly. So I think I was moved on to Ghostbusters, and Steve became editor of the Action Force Monthly, and I was basically being asked to train Steve. That's my recollection, and Steve was definitely ready to edit.
Okay,
but
it's credited to John Tomlinson as editor for the monthly.
Oh right, okay. Yeah, John. But did Steve not take over later?
I don't.
Maybe Steve and I were writing issues.
Yeah, he's got some writing credits, I think. Yeah.
And you know, we were very keen to break into the monthly market. I doubt whether Marvel US would be very supportive of this, but we it was called European Missions. You don't have any of the
Yeah.
European, you know, we had to do 2 cover setups
Yeah.
because the idea was to sell it in. But if I was editor of G.I. Joe, or if I was the writer of G.I. Joe, I would not take kindly to Brits featuring Snake Eyes so prominently, because you really want to, you know, you cherish your development of the characters. So
Yeah.
I think some of these issues were published after I left Marvel.
Okay.
But I was definitely working on I think Ghostbusters, and then I was working on Dragon's Claws and Death's Head. Again, I'm not sure of the timeline. It's a very short one. It's only 4 years, but it's a long time ago. But you can actually see there that, you know, having to feature certain toys, the
Yeah, for
hovercraft
sure.
and the vehicle in the ice there, or yeah,
Yeah.
we still
Snowcat, yeah.
we still had to push forward. Was there more than 10 issues? Keep going. I don't remember.
Oh, there was a total of 15 for this.
15.
Yeah. So
Very
just
much,
another
yeah.
year. It survived another year. It was not the success that Transformers was. That was what hurt Action Force. And we were competing with more traditional comic titles like Battle and, you know, the Commando, the War Library, all those.
Mhm.
And you know, that has a very fiercely loyal market. Hasbro wanted us to reproduce the success of Transformers, and Battle Action Force was neither one or the other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you look back at Battle Action Force before you started on the Marvel
I think
Action
I picked
Force?
up one issue
Mhm.
and was like, wow, this looks like it was made in 1968. Because they were still using that paper.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
we had the glossy, sexy Marvel weeklies look.
Yeah.
Full color, yeah.
Full color, yeah. And that's the beginning of the days of, you know, the 70s. You had Countdown and Look-In, which had many different franchises. And then, you know, Des Skin pioneered the devoted franchise comic with Doctor Who, and then later Blake Seven. So in the 80s, the toy manufacturers were taking the lead because they owned the properties. They owned Transformers. They owned Action Force. They owned Care Bears. They owned these toy properties that they wanted the comics to promote. So they didn't want to be pushed to the back of an anthology. They wanted to be center stage. And that's what we offered. And, you know, Robert Sutherland, who's managing director, was super smart. You know, I mean, Thomas the Tank Engine is still going. It started at Marvel, and then he took it with him and created Redan Comics. And I've seen Thomas the Tank Engine on newsstands in the States. That book just prints money because Thomas is one of those classic characters like Winnie the Pooh, you know, and you know, he had a good nose for franchises. He was also, he understood that the fans at Marvel needed to work on American style comics, so he tried, but oftentimes Marvel US was suspicious of us, and even Doctor Who barely made the transition to the States, you know. And in fact, I'm glad it failed, because that meant Doctor Who magazine could continue as it was and didn't become, you know, a vehicle to present comic material for the US to reprint, you know, which the Marvel premiere issues of Doctor Who didn't do very well. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more of them.
And
so,
do you think the sort of the ending of the Action Force Weekly and moving it into the monthly and the equivalent European missions was that kind of driven by the desire to make it closer to the American books and to, you know, shrink the
never close? No.
Okay.
Always time and money, right? So, you know, I recognize the need to create the comic book that the licensor wanted. You want your comic to be successful. You're given a project. I'm 24, 25 when I'm editing this, and I'm just excited to be able to commission writers and artists and keep my friends, bring my friends, give them a career, which was, that was, you want to be working with people that you admire, and you want them to get the opportunities, but you don't want them to go and work for 2000 AD, not when you work for and they all did. They all left us behind.
Stay at my level. Don't go up to the higher paid jobs.
Well, there you go. You see, you're buying into that. What is the level anyway? You guys are all fans of Action Force, right? So that was your thing. And I used to say to Simon, when artists that worked on Transformers went to work for 2000 AD, like Barry Kitson, I said, one day fans will come to you and they'll have you up there where all of my contemporaries had 2000 AD up there, right? Everything, anybody that is, when you're exposed to something between the ages of 8 and 12, those are the key years. You emotionally imprint on that toy, on that comic book. It doesn't matter if it's Thundercats, which was one of the hardest franchises to work on because it was such a limited story. There was Mumra and there was Lion-O, and how do you get them into trouble? How do you generate conflict? And that didn't last very long, Thundercats, as a cartoon show or as a weekly. And I remember working on that as an editor and being really frustrated. How do you find the stories in that? G.I. Joe is easy. Cobra, G.I. It's Star Wars. It's the same setup as Star Wars. Wars are easy. There's always and a lot of that has trickled into Elephantmen because I have the war story as a backstory to the Elephantmen. And I can tell you, I've been writing Elephantmen for 120 issues. That's not an easy task. I'm so in awe of anybody that can do it for longer, like Chris Claremont and the X-Men. Coming up with new situations, not repeating yourself. So it's great that you have now introduced these characters. Now bring this thing in, and it's all about where you weave the soap opera in. But you can't control the love that people have for 2000 AD. But what you do have now, I remember Jay Lee, who's a very well thought of American comic book artist. Is he born in America? I'm sure he doesn't mind being called an American comic book artist. Massive fan of Transformers. All these guys that grew up in the 90s, were exposed to whatever they were exposed to. I was exposed to Doctor Who.
Jay Lee worked on the Transformers versus G.I. Joe series that was set. That's right, yeah.
Willingly.
Yes, willingly.
Yeah. He didn't want to work on Judge Dredd. He's like, why do you Brits all love Judge Dredd? Because that was one of the things that I connected to in my teens, So that's the thing, is that it's all emotional. There isn't a higher or a lower level. There's only emotion and your connection. So, you can't convince somebody who loves Thundercats and is now 55 or 45 or whatever age group that fits that. You can't convince them that one is better than the other because they still have their toys in the cupboard, at home. And if they see a brand new Lion-O in packaging, or if they see, a Lady J character, I actually, they've just released they haven't released it yet, but there's a 4-pack of all the characters I worked on. And it cost me $220. I paid the money. They haven't turned up yet, but I was like, well, those are the 4 characters I worked on, and I have a little bit of a fondness for G.I. Joe in that small window of 1987 when I edited the comic. So
this little window of characters, the 1987.
Yeah, there you go, Lady J.
Sort of
Footloose. I think Footloose was the Dan Abnett, Brian Hitch comic. Does he have glasses? Who's the character with glasses? Dusty?
Who
Maybe it's Dusty.
wears glasses? Not sure.
Shipwreck. Yeah, we did a story with Shipwreck. He's basically looks
Yeah,
like
you'd had Shipwreck. Yeah.
He's old Action Man.
Yeah, all of
He's
this,
the
all of
Action
these
Man I
guys.
had with the little cockeyed hat, the blue shirt. I had an Action Man like that. I remember thinking, oh, that's Action Man. Yeah, Crimson Guard. So we had to feature all the Quick Kick. And Quick Kick, of
pretty
course,
much.
Quick Kick allowed me to reprint Master of Kung Fu in the back of Action Force because it was Kung Fu.
So was that was that a combination of again, like, sort of, you know, it's soaking up content and here's some content, and also that you loved Master of Kung Fu?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, I loved particularly the Paul Gulacy issues. I loved the Jim Starlin issues, but he was only around for 3 or 4 issues. You know, and here's a Kung Fu character that we had to feature in the strip. And actually, there was a little Quick Kick prologue.
Yeah.
For Shang-Chi, yes.
Yeah.
Introducing Shang-Chi as somebody Quick Kick knows, yeah.
Yeah. And
I think that was Grant
from.
Morrison.
So
Grant Morrison writing it, yeah.
So that's how I put. Originally, Kev Hopgood was supposed to draw that prologue, and he was a big Shang-Chi fan, but he couldn't fit it in his schedule. So that's when I got Steve Yoel, who'd been working on Thundercats. I can't remember the timeline, so I don't know whether it's overlap or. But Steve was somebody that we discovered. In other words, who submitted some samples that were really good. And you can see here, I mean, you know, he was as good then as he is today. He's maintained a high standard
really
throughout
good
his career.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, what happened to Steve? He got stolen by Grant, who had been writing Zoids as well. And Grant was sort of, you know, we were very lucky to have Grant for as long as we did. And he was writing in the Alan Moore style. In fact, we would be reading Swamp Thing in the office, and then 3 weeks later, Grant would turn in a script very much influenced by that issue of Swamp Thing we just read. And I'm thinking in particular of an issue, My Blue World or My Blue Heaven, which was a Swamp Thing issue that was all in blues. And then Grant had Blue Zoid, Red Zoid color schemes that, you know, one page would be colored in blues, one in reds, something like that. But that was fine because Grant was influenced by Alan Moore, but he didn't sacrifice the characters of the story. You know, he was influenced by that style of storytelling, but he was just using it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and making the stories a little bit more. He gave them a lot of substance, and it's a shame that we didn't continue with Zoids Monthly because Grant and Steve were on a high that then moved over to Zenith. So they went from Zoids to Zenith. Action Force, you know, as a sort of springboard. But yes, you know, there's only so much stuff you can put in the back. We couldn't run all the G.I. Joe material because we were trying to do what we did with Transformers, which was to thread it in so that British readers didn't think, why are they talking? Who are these characters? And why doesn't this relate to the last issue? We threaded. And that's something Simon taught me on Transformers. He threaded everything in so that it, you know, you can't change the way the US editorial team are telling the stories. So you retrofit your British material to dovetail into them. So Simon was a master at doing that, you know, and that's why I did the whole prologue sequence for Master of Kung Fu, so that people reading G.I. Joe would say, oh, what, there's a bonus quick story. Quick And who's this guy, Master of Kung Fu? I'm going to read this as well. This is related to the Action Force universe. And that was what, as editorial, we tried to be clever in the way we connected the Marvel universe to the G.I. Joe or Transformers universe, because we were fans, and we were fans of that encompassing, multiverse of madness, right? In my mind, Doctor Who took place in the same universe as Dragon's Claws, so I made it happen. And a lot of Doctor Who fans do not like the fact that the Sleaze brothers appeared in Doctor Who. They even got on the cover, but I knew as a fan what a thrill it is when you see that they're part of the same world. So, and that material.
I know when Death's Head showed up in an Iron Man comic a few years ago, it was probably one of the highlights of my life.
Oh, in the new material, you mean?
Was it 4 or 5 years ago? He showed up in an issue of Iron Man, and I was like, "This is the best thing ever."
Yeah, because it validates your childhood.
Exactly.
And
I know him.
And I was very lucky. I went to visit Marvel US, and Tom DeFalco said to me, "Right, I'm going to send you to see a Broadway play. Who would you like to go with you?" And I said, and I think he gave me a list of choices, and I said Walt Simonson and Louise Simonson. So we went to see a play with Judd Hirsch in it. I can't remember what it was called. I think Cleveland Little was in it with him, about 2 homeless people in the park or something like that. But key was I got to know Walt, and I asked him to do a cover for Death's Head, because we were doing a crossover with Fantastic Four, and it had not at that point been announced. And I don't know if it even influenced Ralph Macchio to hire Walt, because we had Death's Head holding the Thing over the edge of the Baxter building on the cover. And that was his first Fantastic Four work.
Wow.
And he really liked drawing the character. So then Death's Head appeared in Fantastic Four as part of the TVA. Time Variance Authority, for those of you who haven't seen it. So, that was part of the fun. And especially Simon loved being part of that. And we used the Masters matter compression eliminator to shrink Death's Head down to size for Transformers. And I know I'm going off topic, but the fact that you all know these characters is because we successfully connected everything. We did an Action Force Transformers crossover. And again, Simon wrote that because who else knew all the characters? And I think Jeff Sr. drew that because it's so hard to get an artist that can draw humans and Autobots. So we like to have fun, and I'm sure we initiated that crossover, even though the US had already done one. It's a no-brainer when Hasbro owns both properties. So, we were in comics to have fun, but we also had to check all the boxes.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that whole year of my life because I learned so much so quickly. And actually, I got Jerry Paris in to do the last issue because I wanted another cover that had the blister pack artwork style on it. So issue 50, was it issue 50 that we finished?
Yeah, that's right.
Jerry did this. Jerry was just a phenomenal artist. He'd done Transformers #1 cover art. And I think he's recreated it. Yeah, there you go. And it looks nice with your background around it too, like the first issue. Being able to work with artists of this caliber, young artists, was just a treat. Dougie was 15 when he did his first work for MarvelUK, and I'm still good friends with Dougie to this day. That might be it. That might be his first work. His first published work, I want to say, was something else like Thundercats. But another artist who Dave Gibbons gave me the nod because he'd seen Dougie's work at a convention, and I was talking to Dave about something. We were probably trying to get him to do a cover for something, and he said, "Gibbons pick Dougie Braithwaite." And when somebody of Dave's stature tells you to work with someone, you get their phone number real quick. And Dougie, just, I think he had done, I gave him a sample script, and what he turned in was better than the one we published. So I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, I mean, just, you think we had a roster of artists, but we were always scrambling. Anthony Williams came in on Action Force quite early on when Kev was moving on to 2000 AD. And to go back to Kev had to do 5 pages in a night one time. And he came in, he did not sleep. He did them all. All I remember, there were horses in it. And he thought he was going to get fired. It's not that one.
No. That's
No.
He's got his name on it. I can see that that's not a horse.
Burning on all cylinders. But I remember him saying to me that was a turning point, that he could turn in 5 pages of artwork that he felt he'd sort of cut too many corners. Let me put it that way. And he said to me that after that 5-pager, he realized he didn't have to work so hard. And I would say that, that's a lot of artists have to learn how to do things quickly. And I don't think Kev's artwork, the quality of his artwork didn't drop, but he realized that sometimes he was killing himself on a page when he didn't have to, and I think he did whatever it was called, Night Zero, Beyond Zero. He inked that himself, and most artists want to ink their own work, and you can do that at 2000 AD because they pay you better. Right. And 2000 AD was always about artists that penciled and inked their own work. I think some art teams gravitated to 2000 AD and continued to work with inkers that we'd paired them up with. But Mike Collins and Mark Farmer were actually put together by 2000 AD. And they came to us as a sort of fait accompli. And Mark Farmer he penciled Andrew a 2-part Storm Shadow Snake Eye story.
That's right, yeah.
And that was because Alan Davis was encouraging him to draw. But I think that was the beginning and end of Mark's penciling career because, he's such a good inker. And he could make more money inking, and he started working in America long before the other members of our teams.
The other person that I've done a slide for, that I'll just go back to this one. Actually, we didn't show it on the screen when we were talking about
look
Jeff,
at that cover. That was beautiful.
How brilliant is that? That was a wraparound cover, and is just making a tank kind of leap in the air, but completely selling it.
Well, but because a tank will jump in the air if there's an explosion behind it. I mean, Jeff thinks things through, and look at the energy of Lady J. Look at the, no one else can draw that way because nobody stands that way. Flint does not stand that way. Look at the energy in those.
Energy is the word when you think of when you think of his art, for sure. And that the one on the left was a great strip, and I think that was one where
that's like a Simon title.
A character Gung Ho was sliced by Storm Shadow to give him an injury, so that when you then in the next issue had the G.I. Joe reprint with Gung Ho in the hospital with a bandage, it sort of connects that you've got kind of a different origin for his injury, but it's still flowing.
It's a multiverse. But you know,
So-
Simon would always do things like this. So early on, I said he was a big Jam fan, you know, the band, and there's the song, you know, there's an H bomb in Wardour Street, and I said make a story based on that, thinking that there would be a nuclear bomb in the center of London, and he has it in a baby. It's a baby because he had that title holding the baby, and he turned it into it was an A bomb in Wardour Street. He said there's a bomb. It's like, no, Simon, it's supposed to be an atom bomb. This is Action Force. But I think Simon always enjoyed outsmarting me. Thank you very much. There's a bomb, not an A bomb. So, you know, that's Simon sort of bringing me down to size,
baby.
because it's a more manageable storyline. I may have got in trouble about that one. Richard, you can't suggest that they're going to blow up a baby. But Fast Feud, that's a typical Simon title. I wanted, you know, Death to Cobra. You know, I wanted titles that were lurid, like the comics that I read growing up, like Doctor Who story titles. Something of the something. When I was editing Doctor Who, I said, all stories must be called something of the something. So we had Claws of the Clarthy, Invaders from... It had to be something and something. And, you know, when you make editorial edicts like that, you deserve to be disobeyed. Simon's sense of humor was always... Simon was always tweaking the people he works with, because that's his sense of humor. And that's why, you know, he's written Transformers for so long, and you know he's become identified with, you know, his body of work from the 80s, which of course is now held in great esteem by people like yourselves. You know, that's why there was a Death's Head omnibus last year, and you know, the Dragon Claws hardcover that came out from Panini. You know, is it Panini? You know, the company that does those libraries.
Hachette, is it?
Yeah, it's either Hachette or yeah. And it's nice that Dragon Claws is available in hardcover. I have it.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
You know, and it's just a shame I've never seen all this Action Force stuff reprinted, and it deserves to be. I'm sure IDW may have printed some of it. But it was
they haven't actually. It's something we've for the Action Force book. We are in contact with Hasbro and IDW, and we were nudging them to try do it last year. And we were
this is the mistake you all make. Don't ask for permission. Do it and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, I think there's was it Swedish or something like that put out a
Swedish fan group did a reprint of the Action Force comics, translated into Swedish.
Make it not for profit. All profits go to Ukraine, and then they'll look like shit if they
they can't argue. Then.
If they argue,
don't be that guy. Yeah.
No, that's always been my philosophy. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Absolutely. The last creator, the artist that I was going to spotlight on the things that slides I've been sharing has been Staz Johnson. So another young whippersnapper when he started at Marvel.
And I never met him because by issue 15, I think that's August 1989. I was living in New York. I was working for Marvel US. I was lettering. What was I lettering? So many comic strips that nobody read because I was doing things for Marvel Superheroes, which was a sort of anthology book. I was Deathlock. I did an issue of Deathlock. I moved to America in 1989, just after the first Action Force monthly came out. That might be 1990. I'm not sure. In 1990, I'd moved to California, and I lived in California half my life. So Comicraft was calling, whether I knew it or not. But all the work that I did, like I said before, I called it Marvel College because I learned so much in such a short period of time. And as I was saying to you, I think that's a terrible cover, by the way. I don't know who the editor of that issue was, but that would not have passed me by. But they were probably having to sell that toy range.
Yeah.
But, I remember the cover where
that year's toys.
The cover where Jeff popped the tank in the air. That's the challenge. How do you show most of the toy? We had one coming down a waterfall or something, or in the ice. You want to show as much of the toy as possible and make it exciting.
Yeah, and the front on is it's not the most.
It's limiting. But also we had all these things about solid colors behind logos. Robert Sutherland would probably not have liked those peanuts on top of the logo. I don't know what those are. Those laser flat, they look
trace of fire, I think.
Yeah, they look.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that I learned goes into Elephantmen today. And there's a character in Elephantmen called Yvette, who looks a lot like Lady J. But that's a sort of stereotype: the beret, the flak jacket. The whole look of characters in G.I. Joe. I didn't realize till I moved to America, especially. I have a friend who collects G.I. Joe toys. He's probably your age, maybe a bit older. He's younger than I am, but he collects everything. And has a massive part of his home that he built himself. He's a police officer in Arizona, and lovely guy. Helps me out at Comic Cons. He's a big fan of comics, toys, original art, you name it. And he has that emotional connection to the toys. So working at Marvel taught me an awful lot about storytelling, about working with franchises. And now I work with my own franchise. If you want something to be successful, you have to learn the lessons. The reasons Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are successful is because they're so freaking cool. You react to them. I've seen all but the last. I haven't seen the Snake Eyes movie because that came out during the pandemic.
Yeah, that was last summer, wasn't it?
Last August
2021.
But my son Jet was obsessed with the Transformers movie, and he wanted to see the G.I. Joe movies. So I went, and as a former editor, you're like, oh, they did that. Oh yeah, there's Snake Eyes, there's Storm Shadow. Oh, they've got all the right characters. The Transformers movies, which are very violent, I think they're very noisy, they're Michael Bay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But watching the Transformers movies, with that, and the best Transformers movie is Transformers the movie. Let's not get that wrong. But when you see the Transformers movie, they do capture the characters. Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, they capture them. We love Bumblebee. We couldn't have enough Bumblebee in the comic at all. So you develop an appreciation of bringing a toy line to life. And, I always think that Elephantmen is a toy line waiting to happen. I've got a rhino. I've got a hippo. I've got an elephant. I've got good-looking female characters, strong, good-looking female characters. There's a lot of strong female characters in G.I. Joe. So, you can't help but look at your own work and see the influences. I do another book for Amazon for Comixology called Ask for Mercy. And she is actually based on the character Yvette, because Yvette was such a popular character, a girl with a beret in France with a machine gun, right? And very popular character. And then I thought, I wish she was a central character. So I created this character, Mercy. And again, Mercy, there's a character called Mercy in Dragon's Claws, because I said to Simon, Mercy is a good name for a character. And she's in Dragon Claws, but I was like, wait, I thought that up. I'm taking that back. Right? And that character became. It's funny because at first I thought of it as a Doctor Strange book, but it's actually more of a Conan book because I loved Conan, and Conan was always swords and sorcery. And it took me 3 volumes of Ask for Mercy to realize that this was more of a sword and sorcery book than a Doctor Strange book. There's a quick plug there.
There we go.
Mercy, soon to be in print from Dark Horse Comics. These are
excellent.
Print on demand comics. But I do want to show you I got this on Amazon. And again, there's the background. There's the blister pack background. And Kev did that. This was it. I must have sold this years ago, but I was really proud of this annual. It's reprint. It's G.I. Joe reprint. But that should have been the cover of issue 1 of Action Force. We did that year. We had on all the annuals, we connected them by doing Optimus Prime and Megatron, or Flint and Destro, and maybe Mumra and Lion-O. We conspired again to give things a theme.
Yeah, cohesiveness. Yeah.
And I think John Tomlinson did the design on this. I was the editor, and Kev did the illustrations because I hated it as a Doctor Who fan when they didn't use the artists from Countdown and TV Action or Doctor Who Weekly. I hated it when they did cheap annuals. I was like, we know how good it can look. What are you doing to us? And I think my biggest regret is not putting the story from the annual, Mike Golden.
Yearbook.
Realized that.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful looking book. I wish we'd put that in a hardcover instead. But at the time it was like, what's the good material? Let's use the good material. So
that annual, the main content of it was like a 2-parter where it's the creation of the Cobra Island story, isn't it? And it's a great 2-parter, and it fits so well without it being divided up into the weekly format. So I love that. I love that.
When I sat down and read the 70 issues available at that time, I was taking notes because I had to. If we did the annual, it was probably very soon after we launched, and the fact that Kev did all the artwork means that it belonged to his era. So I can never remember timelines very well. I do remember working on the weekend on that with John. We were fans. Everything we did with love, even if we weren't big fans of G.I. Joe. We wanted to make something better, even though we were probably looked down on by Marvel editorial in the US. And I guarantee we were. It was a big struggle for me to work in the States. I had to work harder, partly because at the time I didn't have my green card. I didn't really know where I was going to live. I didn't know I'd stay in the States. So I had to sweep the floor in terms of lettering when I started working. But because I had to sweep the floor, I made sure it was spotless, because I was held to a higher standard, because the letterers that were continuously working there were taking their work for granted, and I couldn't. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any work because I was the foreigner, So we did everything with love. Actually, I don't know if you guys are watching Moon Knight, but for some reason I had to read 27 issues of Moon Knight on a Saturday. Maybe we were looking at it for a backup strip for something. And I remember it because that's when I got my first migraine headache. And 3 episodes into Moon Knight, I turned to my wife and said,
I've got a migraine.
I think I've got a migraine coming on, because this is just like reading the comic. But we buried ourselves in whatever we were doing, even if it was Thundercats, which again, very difficult to work with. And I'm very proud. That's why when I saw your bound copy, I was like, I want one of those. I sold all my issues in the 90s thinking I'll be lucky to get any money for these. But when I saw this was $11 on Amazon, I was like, I really should have a copy of that, because it sort of signifies a moment in time. My friendship with Kev, my friendship with Simon, getting my first editorial assignment, working with Steve Yoel, working with Grant Morrison, golden memories. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, I mean, all of these people that started out in Pages of Action Force as some of their very earliest work, and the sort of the careers that they've gone on to forge. It's it's what a legacy.
Well, Kev came out to see, I think, Age of Ultron premiere when I was in Long Beach. It's 2015, and he and his wife got tickets because of War Machine, because he co-created War Machine. And it was so funny because they came over. I think we ordered food in, and then he said, we're just going to get the bus back to Hollywood. And I was like, you're such a Brit. You don't get a bus back to Hollywood at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. It would take him 3 hours to make the changes, everything. He's like, no, I can take the bus. I was like, Kev, you're not in London anymore. So I drove him to his Marvel expense paid hotel in Hollywood so that he could go to the premiere the next day. I hate to think what would happen to him on LA.
He got the bus.
But we hung out for the day. I took him around as much as I could, because Brits come to LA thinking they can do everything in 2 days. They don't understand the traffic. So I'm still in touch with Dave Hine, who used to ink Kev. Dougie and I had a Zoom phone call recently. He did 5-page story for me for
Nice.
Elephantmen, which was in one of the Hero Initiative comics, I think. So, I feel very fortunate, especially, Facebook keeps us all connected.
Absolutely.
But, I saw Simon and Jeff at the Londonderry or Derry, don't know which one is right to say, convention a few years ago. So it's nice that we have all this, all these memories to laugh at.
We had a message in from Brian, who's Paddy's co-conspirator on
Send
putting
them
together.
to me, please.
So
maybe I can reassemble a collection.
it can happen. Patience, and a good eBay watch. Notification is the key.
This is how emotionally connected I am to a comic. And this was in the beginning days of eBay, when things were a lot cheaper, but I recreated my whole Countdown TV action collection. And, I tried to get the best copies, but I also recreated 10 years of Lookin'. I have every issue from 1972 to 1982 of Lookin', because that was, Countdown and Lookin', because they had the Jerry Anderson strips, Space 1999. Michael Noble did some beautiful work for Lookin' on Wurzel Gummidge, Famous Five. Robin of Sherwood, all this beautiful artwork. John Bolton, those are the artists I look up to. The generation before all these guys, I was lucky enough to work with, and I've been fortunate to work with Brian Bolland on The Killing Joke, Brian Hitch on Batman just recently, Tim Sale on, for some reason, I've done a lot of Batman.
Well, there is a lot of Batman as well.
There is a lot of Batman, but there's an inordinate amount of Batman that I've worked on. Long Halloween, Killing Joke, Batman's Grave. Those are just the ones I can remember because they're the more popular ones. But as a lettering artist, I've been very, very fortunate. But, key to me was learning about creating your own comic, which is what I've done for the past 25 years.
Wonderful.
And that's what I would encourage any up and coming comic book creator. Get your feet wet with franchise characters, but then make your own franchise. That was drilled into me by John Wagner and Alan Grant on 2000 AD. And just yesterday, Neil Adams passed away, and Neil was a big advocate for creators' rights going back to the 70s, and created his own characters too. Even though he's most closely associated with Batman and Superman and Green Lantern, he was like, he's part of the reason that there is any money paid to creators when they're brought to TV or movies, and he got a nice check when Batman Begins came out, because I think it's Ra's al Ghul.
Okay, yeah, of course, yeah.
And that's right. If there was a movie made on of an Action Force story, Larry Hama should get a big check, because he brought those characters to life. And that was the surprising thing when I read G.I. Joe. I was like, wait a minute, this is good stuff. I can't use all of it, but I wish I could. I wish I could have run that stuff. I just recently, they did a reprint of Silent Interlude with a recreation of it with different artists. Have you seen that?
Yes, some of our friends worked on it. So a couple of the artists are friends of ours. So.
And I was like, oh, I don't have a copy of that. I better buy one.
Yeah, it's getting hard to find. Yeah.
It's getting hard to find already. Yeah,
it's expensive, and I do wish I'd kept my library of Marvel UK work, but there's only so much room on your shelves.
And a couple of my sort of final questions were: what was your relationship like with Hasbro as you were working on the book? You've already sort of alluded to a couple of sort of prickliness about you can't do that.
The thing that you remember when you get it wrong and they tell you off.
Right.
Otherwise, they were a dream, because they supplied reference material. I don't remember a lot of toys coming to the office.
I was going to ask, was there a box of toys that went around artists? Because I think there was for Zoids, so like a famous box that went around.
Yeah, we had a Zark in the office. I remember that. Croc. Kev had a Zoidzilla, I think. But getting a hold of them was ridiculously difficult. It's like, we're working for you, Tony, Hasbro. Send us some toys.
Yeah.
And of course, the Christmas Optimus Prime was the desirable Christmas present. Everybody I knew was saying, can you get a hold of an Optimus Prime for me? No. You work on the comic. Can't get one for myself. Can't get one for the artist. So photo reference was easy to get hold of, but not toys. So yeah. SOL.
Brilliant. So I think we've taken up a lot of your time, and it's flown by. I'm sure.
Oh my gosh! It's nearly 4 o'clock.
And I think we could all keep on going as well. But it's been an absolute joy. It's really flown by, and I feel very privileged to have got this insight into all of these early days, because when this comic was coming out and I had a subscription to it at my local newsagent, it was getting put through my door on a weekly basis. That was probably the highlight of the week. It really was. So, nice to revisit.
We all come from, when you're a fan of comics, what you actually want to do is recreate the feeling you had when you were young reading comics, so it's always gratifying to know that we succeeded even on titles that we thought had failed, but that comic probably failed, selling about 70,000 issues. It's a big joke that they canceled the US Transformers. Issue 80 was selling just under 100,000. And in those days, Marvel's policy was, if it's selling under 100,000, cancel it.
Yeah.
100
Now it would be.
copy they kill for that on X-Men.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
You know, but then there was no digital media. There weren't omnibuses and collections. There weren't any trade paperback collections in those days. We used to love doing the collected comics. I don't think we did any Action Force collected comics, but we did Ghostbusters collected comics. We did Zoids collected comics, and I wish we'd been able to do more of those.
Perfect. So I think, unfortunately, we have to leave it somewhere. So maybe we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Richard, for your time.
Welcome.
And yeah, do you want to leave one last plug? Where can people find you? What should they be getting from you at the
buying
moment?
Elephantmen and Ask for Mercy on Amazon and Comixology. Although the beef is one of my favorite things that I've written. Let me just quick plug the beef with Shaky Kane.
Oh yes, Shaky Kane. Yeah,
British creator. Also coming from Dark Horse next year, the Elephantmen Comixology series. That's volume 1. Here's volume 2, which has giant robots in it, because why not? And soon to be available via Kindle print on demand. There's Yvette. That's the war story I was telling you about. Look, she has red hair. How could that be? And that's actually anybody who buys Shift. Are you aware of Shift?
I'm
It's
not
a
sure what
monthly
Shift
comic
is.
book magazine, and they're serializing the Yvette story.
Oh,
starting
I think I've seen this stuff for this.
Yeah. Shift features To the Death by Simon Furman and Jeff Senior. And because I worked on that in a lettering capacity, I got to know Adrian, who's the publisher, and Elephantmen will start in Shift quite soon. So watch out for that in your local WH Smiths.
Brilliant.
Other newsagents are, of course, available.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Richard. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks
Paddy.
very much, Richard.
It's a pleasure.
And we will be talking with Paddy and Brian some point shortly.
Paddy will get my address for those 2 issues of 1 and 2.
Yes.
Yeah,
We'll
I'll pop them up. We'll make sure they hook them up.
Great.
Brilliant.
All right.
Okay. Here we go. And here's the outro. Bye.